Hello, I'm Peter Kirsten, Principal Planner with the RTA Strategic Planning team. For the past 18 months, we've been working with stakeholders from across the region and with our partners at CTA, Metro, and PACE to develop a new plan for the future of transit in the six-county region of Northeastern Illinois. It is our pleasure to present to you Transit is the Answer, the next five-year regional transit strategic plan. The plan was released publicly on Monday, December 5th, and is now available for public comment through January 9th. You will find instructions on how to provide comment at rtachicago.org and at the end of this presentation. From the outset, the process of developing this plan has been very different from past efforts. It was clear we needed to take a big tent approach, which meant broadening our audience and providing new ways to engage. We also wanted to create feedback loops between RTA and our stakeholders, riders, and members of the general public throughout the plan development, rather than waiting until the end of the process to ask for feedback. This approach allowed us to listen early, to co-create many of the plan elements, and eventually coalesce around a vision and an agenda for advocacy and action. The engagement process began last fall with 20 guest bloggers and speakers at the RTA board meetings, over 2,600 survey responses to 3 different public surveys over the course of 18 months. We held 100 plus hours of stakeholder meetings, 8 public workshops and events across all 6 counties, and around 20,000 followers engaged across social platforms. The listening and engagement will also continue in 2023 as we build a coalition to advance the agenda for advocacy and action. The pictures you see on screen and throughout this presentation are of people we met at events throughout the region, where we sought their input on what they value about the transit system and how they hope the system may be able to change in the future to better serve the region. This plan was truly co-created such that it isn't just the RTA, but belongs to all of us. Plan is really the first step in this process, and we look forward to working with you to implement the plan in 2023. Through this new process and with these new voices, we developed the following vision: safe, reliable, accessible public transportation that connects people to opportunity, advances equity, and combats climate change. And alongside it, 3 principles that have and will continue to guide our work: equity, stewardship, and committed to change. The vision and principles have been the central criteria guiding all plan development for both RTA staff and all of the different stakeholders, partners, and riders we've engaged along the way. As we look to the future, we see that the current funding model is unsustainable. Public funding and operating revenue will not be enough to cover expenses. We estimate that in 2026, we could have a regional transit budget deficit of more than $730 million annually, which is about 20% of our operating budget. The reason for this deficit is twofold. First, expenses are higher. In the near term, inflation is certainly going to be a challenge, but labor is the dominant expense category. Attracting and retaining talent, which is a serious and ongoing challenge for the transit industry, requires competitive compensation and benefits. The second reason for the deficit is that fewer people are riding the system than did in 2019. We anticipate that there will be lasting changes to the ways that people commute, such that we don't expect ridership to return to 2019 levels by 2026, or any time really over the next decade. Note, this is not unique to our region. Peer regions and transit agencies throughout the country are facing proportionately similar deficits. This is a major funding crisis that we are facing, and we need to work together to address. An investment in transit is an investment in our region. In just 2022 alone, the service provided by CTA, Metro, and PACE is estimated to deliver $17.2 billion in regional benefits. Put another way, for every dollar we invest in transit through the operating and capital budgets, the residents and communities of our region receive $3.86 in overall benefits. Put another way still, there is a high cost to failing to adequately fund our system, and that cost is borne by the region. Further transit impact analysis can be found beginning on page 23 of the draft and in related documents linked on the plan website. Historically, transit agencies have 2 levers to address operating budget deficits: raise fares or they can cut service. Let us be clear. It is impossible for RTA and the service boards to solve the funding cliff we are facing by raising fares and cutting service alone. Fare increases of the magnitude needed to fill the budget gap doubling from what they are today, would drive down ridership and negate additional revenue brought in by higher fares, while rendering the system unaffordable for many that most rely on it. Throughout this process, we asked people how the region should respond to a potential future budget deficit, by scaling back service or by pursuing additional funding for transit. Survey response overwhelmingly indicated that the RTA should pursue additional funding to maintain our system and see increased investment to make transit safer, more reliable, and accessible rather than cutting service. Knowing that a future fiscal cliff is looming, RTA and the service boards are working hard to avert these financial challenges and evolve toward a more sustainable funding structure. 27 federal, state, and local revenue policies to support the Chicago regional system were identified, analyzed, and evaluated. Each revenue policy was scored based on several criteria, including annual yield, stability, nexus with transportation, equity, and the resources needed to establish the revenue source and collect revenue. The figure shown at right reflects the top 11 potential revenue sources in order of estimated annual yield. Our analysis also demonstrates that no single funding solution would be able to generate sufficient revenue alone to avert the projected fiscal cliff of $730 million in 2026 for the existing transit system, or to fund major improvements or expansions to the system that the public wants to see. The region will need to explore options in these areas and pursue several additional state and local funding mechanisms. More on potential funding solutions beginning on page 18 of the draft. Capital funding was the focus of the last regional transit strategic plan, Invest in Transit. And while our region's capital investment needs remain substantial, there has been progress with passage of Rebuild Illinois and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act signed into law in 2021, as well as administrative improvements at the RTA and service boards to improve transparency and speed up delivery. This plan will introduce 12 new evaluation themes and metrics to be incorporated into the 5-year capital program. Beginning with the 2024 budget cycle, so next year, projects will be evaluated on themes including racial equity and mobility justice, economic development, climate impact, state of good repair, and other themes. Additional details on capital planning can be found on page 25 of the draft plan. To advance this plan's vision, we're moving forward with an agenda for advocacy and action. If you've been involved with this process up to now, you've likely heard this list or even contributed to the creation of this list. There's a lot here. It's an ambitious agenda to accomplish, not as the RT alone, but as a coalition. Advocacy items are shown here and include longer-term substantive changes to how our regional transit system works, and largely include changes that the RTA and the service boards need support from stakeholders to accomplish. This includes securing increased funding for transit operations, developing a budget less reliant on rider fares, but instead focused on expanding access to opportunity, building a coalition around the value transit brings to the Chicago region, supporting communities' efforts to improve the area around their transit stations and stops, and to pursue equitable transit-oriented development, engaging with communities in an inclusive and transparent way about how transit dollars are spent in the Chicago region, securing increased funding for transit infrastructure, and partnering with roadway agencies to build more transit-friendly streets and advance bus rapid transit. You can find the complete advocacy agenda details beginning on page 34 of the draft plan. Action items are shown here and have the potential to be more immediate. They may not be easy, but will help address changing and unmet needs of riders and the communities we serve. These are things RTA and the service boards can take the lead to implement with support from our stakeholders. This includes making the transit system safer and more secure for everyone, using new funding as a catalyst to create a fully accessible system, providing more accurate real-time travel information, and making paying for transit more seamless and affordable, accelerating the transition to near zero emission regional system, and assessing the regional capital program in a new way. And lastly, adapting bus and rail service to meet the changing needs of riders. You can find the complete action agenda details beginning on page 51 of the draft plan. Advancing the agenda for advocacy and action starts now. RTA is committing to a set of shared regional activities to begin implementing in 2023. These are divided into 3 categories: transit funding, rider experience, and thriving communities. This slide shows transit funding. In 2023, we will take affirmative steps forward to secure increased funding for transit operations and make the system less reliant upon fare revenue. We'll do this by executing a broad public outreach campaign, collaborating with regional partners to identify funding options and developing revenue proposals, and obtaining continued recovery ratio relief from the Illinois legislature while developing permanent funding structural reform. Rider experience. In 2023, we will deliver a set of new regional transit initiatives that will make the system better for riders, including convening a region-wide cross-sector safety and security summit to facilitate information sharing and explore holistic solutions to the challenges affecting transit. We'll also seek funding to pilot an expanded regional free or reduced fare program available to people experiencing low incomes. And we will commission an independent review of the accessibility and quality of rider communication, signage, and information sharing across and between agencies. Thriving communities. In 2023, we will collaboratively begin development of 3 regional action plans to program investments that support a thriving region. This will include a blueprint for improved accessibility, a regional transit climate action plan, and a transit-friendly communities policy. If you're interested in working with us to help achieve sustainable funding for transit and build a better system for everyone who relies on it, then we're asking you to join our coalition. The agenda for advocacy and action in this plan lays out a path to position the system for long-term success by seeking new funding, making improvements for riders, and supporting communities working to increase transit access. We recognize we can't do this alone. Many of the advocacy and action items in this plan are not under the control of RTA, CTA, Metro, or PACE. Leadership from a diverse group of elected officials and community leaders is needed to achieve meaningful change. Everything you will need to sign up and to stay engaged is at rtachicago.org, and I invite you to visit it, read the plan, sign up for the coalition, and stay tuned.